And welcome back to another edition of the King Kong Trail. I'm Doug Vandiver, again with Russ Fry. How you doing?
Very good. Pleasure
Good.
to be here.
Awesome. This is your second time, and I think this is one of the most talked about uh, people that I've interviewed when it comes to the local area. And it's like, that guy's awesome. So you got to have him back. And it's like, well, we've got a lot more stories that we can get from you.
That's exciting.
So today you have a book, Des Moines County in the Civil War.
You're right.
And you're going to be showing a presentation, and we'll get that edited in and into our viewers. So how have you been? It's been about a month and a half, I think.
Oh yeah, real good. I've taken up running again, so I'm losing a little weight and feeling good.
I wish I could run.
Uh,
But if you see me running, something's wrong. You better go
somebody's
too.
chasing you. Huh?
So, well, tell us a little bit about you're going to be talking about today, and
All right.
we'll go ahead and get into that when you're ready.
Well, gosh, maybe 10 years ago, I was researching. Well, people had ties to Des Moines County who had significant roles in the Civil War. And I thought, well, I'll write a book about it, and then I wrote. That was my very first book, and then I also made a Ken Burns style documentary on it.
Okay.
And it was, in fact, I showed the documentary at the Snake Alley Film Festival the first year they had it. Very first film at the very first Snake Alley Film Festival.
Nice. Excuse me, my mouth is dry.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't think of Des Moines County, let alone Iowa, having to do with anything with the Civil War because it didn't. From what I remember studying in school, it was all over pretty much the from what I was taught, East Coast and down south.
Well, actually, most of the history talks about that theater of the war, but the Western theater was very significant. Vicksburg, when the Union got control of the Mississippi, Shiloh, which was one of the most bloodiest battles in the Civil War, those were all in the Western theater, and Iowa boys were there.
Okay. You know, I've been to one of the houses where they were working with the Underground Railroad.
Oh, yes.
I can't remember where that was.
In
but
Salem, Iowa?
Yes.
Yes. The Llewellyn House.
Yes. And that was cool. Maybe I should have them on too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So-
They have a very good presentation.
Yeah.
And it's on Agency Road.
Yeah,
Agency
there you
Street,
go.
right in front of you.
They had a part where they cut out in the middle of the kitchen area, and where people would go up underneath
Yes.
the house. Of course, my size, I'm not getting down.
Yeah.
There, it looked very cramped and but it sounded like they had very good success getting people through there.
Yeah, and there were Southern slave hunters up in Salem and threatening them. And of course, those people were Quakers, and they were
Yep.
against violence. But
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and get in what you're going to be talking about, the Des Moines County Civil War.
okay, well, I'll start with a picture of a building, and in the corner is a picture of Abraham Lincoln, because Abraham Lincoln visited Burlington.
Really?
And gave a speech. And he gave the speech in 1858, and he was running for the Senate against Stephen Douglas. But that was in Illinois, but for some reason he came to Burlington to give his speech. And he gave it at Grimes Hall, which was located on the corner of Main and Valley. And, of course, he lost the Senate seat, but later was president and commander-in-chief of the Union forces during the Civil War. And they had a plaque, and in this picture there was a plaque on the Grimes Hall building commemorating the speech, and at a drive-through bank at that location now the plaque is there. So if your viewers are downtown, they should go take a look.
So where is the Grimes Hall?
The Grimes Hall was on the northeast corner of Main and Valley.
Okay.
And one of the banks has got a drive-through there now.
Okay.
And the building's gone, but it's been gone Oh, I think they probably tore it down in the 60s, early
So if we're going
70s.
to go look for the plaque, where is that?
It'll be in the picture when the viewers get to see it.
Okay.
But it's right in the walk-through section of the bank's drive-through there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very
Okay.
prominent.
Very very nice.
Yeah, and then we can't leave out the Confederates. Here's a picture of Jefferson Davis, and Jefferson Davis was in Burlington in 1833, but he was a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And this goes back to Black Hawk. Black Hawk had surrendered uh, after the Black Hawk War, and part of Iowa was open for settlement, but not till June of 1833. And there were people sneaking into Burlington to build cabins,
Oh.
and Jefferson Davis was sent down to kick them out. And
Oh
he
boy.
came to Burlington and burnt down their cabins.
Oh.
So I guess he was not a friend of Burlington even way back then.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, and here's this next picture your viewers will see. That is the Burlington Hawkeyes account of the beginning of the Civil War.
Okay.
The firing on Fort.
Editing. And so we have this war declaration, I guess.
Well, this is the firing on Fort Sumter, which was the first round of the Civil War. And what's interesting is that it says this news is by telegraph.
Okay.
And so that means it was overnight that they found out about it, which was very, very fast in those days.
Right. Right.
And this article appeared on like page 3 or 4 of the Hawkeye.
So it was probably, yeah,
Actually, what it is that, of course, this was lead type, and they'd have to do a lot of work. But the first 3 pages of the Hawkeye were ads, and they stayed in the same spot for a month.
Wow.
So the news did start to page 4.
Okay.
So that's why it was there.
Sure.
Yeah, and this is really interesting things when you're going through microfilms where I found this. You'll come across an amazing thing that was very historically significant, and you're seeing what people from Burlington would have seen
Right.
at the time that it happened. So that's quite a sensation.
That's neat.
Yeah, and then 1,699 men from Des Moines County fought in the Civil War.
Really.
Yep, and most of those were volunteers. Some of them volunteered and got a bounty payment to fight for the Civil War. Other people could actually, if you were rich, your dad would pay a fee of a couple $100 and get you out of it, and somebody would serve in your
Right.
place.
Right.
But there were more people per capita from Iowa who fought for the Union than any other state in the North. They were very, very much pro keeping the country together.
Which I think kind of still reflects Iowa. Today we're very involved in politics.
Yes, in fact, our caucuses are coming up, and I'm not so sure that we're all in union anymore. But,
No,
but
yeah.
like you say, we're very involved with our country.
Yeah.
And this picture, that is Charles Matthias, and he was a general in the Civil War, started out as a colonel, but he offered the first militia group to fight for the Union. At least that's what the local history books say.
Okay.
And so this would have been right away, May 61. That's about a month into the Civil War. But the photograph there is of a steamboat, and a group of the militia under Charles Matthias were called the Burlington Rifles, and they're boarding a ship to go to Keokuk to be trained to fight in the Civil War. So right off the bat, that's right down there on Burlington's waterfront.
Wow. That is interesting. Have you ever seen videos where somebody holds up a picture of something like this and hold it up to modern day to kind of give you a feel of of what's happened there.
Yeah.
So where do you think that might be
Well,
around?
that would have been probably close to where the Port of Burlington building is now.
Okay.
And in fact, what you just mentioned is what I try to do with my books. I'll show pictures of then and show it's what's now. Because if you say, my gosh, this is where this happened,
Right.
it gives you a strong sense of connection to,
Right.
to the story.
Right.
Well, Burlington had lots of, Des Moines County had lots of generals. And another one was General Warren, Fitzhenry Warren. And a Civil War camp was named after him, Camp Warren. And you've probably been past the spot where it's at all the time.
Really?
Yes,
Where's this at?
it's where Perkins Restaurant is located now.
No kidding.
Nope, and that was out in the country at the time.
Yeah.
And they had a Civil War camp out there. Cavalry trained them to fight off on horses, but most of them went into the infantry anyway. But there's a drawing that appeared in Harper's Magazine of the camp. However, the artist never was in Burlington. He just made it up.
Oh, okay.
And from all accounts I've read, the camp was not near as nice as
Right.
the painting made it to be.
Right.
But they would march down Agency Road into Burlington, go down to the riverfront to get on the boats to go off to war.
Wow.
Yep.
I can almost see these soldiers marching down the middle of the street.
Yeah.
Of course, back then it's going to be all mud and
All
dirt.
mud. Yeah. But the ladies were out and cheering them on.
Oh, I bet.
And those young men probably felt very proud of
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
And Fitzwarren had a home. Now, do you recognize that house? You've probably been near it.
It looks very familiar.
Well, your viewers might recognize that house still exists. It's being fixed up right now, and it's catty corner from the Des Moines County Heritage Center, which is the old library.
Okay.
So it's on 4th Street there,
Okay.
4th and I think it's Columbia.
Right. So let's see. There's the Historic Society.
Yep, and it's
Right across.
diagonal from there. So that would be the southeast corner of Columbia and Washington.
Okay. So kind of in the triangle, you got the Historic Society, a church,
Yes.
and then this house.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, and then a parking lot on the other corner. Yeah. So that was his home, and it looks just like that now. Not quite as nice, but the young fellow is working on it.
I'm wondering,
Now,
do you know if he knows about the history of that house?
yes,
Okay.
yep. Now I've talked to him about that.
Very nice.
Now that would probably be a hard one for you to recognize. But I imagine some of your viewers, if they went to the old Burlington High School building,
Yep.
would recognize, because that's a parking lot right behind Apollo building or the old high school.
Right.
And there was a Civil War camp in that vicinity.
Wow.
Yep, and it was called Camp Lauman after Jacob Lauman.
Okay.
And Jacob Lauman was another general, and things didn't go well for him. And he was sent home and died here a couple of years after the war and was buried in Aspen Grove Cemetery.
Okay. Now, I actually did go to the high school.
Oh, did you? I did.
It was the alternative school at that time.
Yeah.
I had some troubles at the high school,
Yeah.
and so I went there and graduated. So I definitely recognized
Well,
this.
wongle, yeah.
This backside.
Did
of
you
the
go to
building.
Gibby's?
What's that?
Did you go to Gibby's, or was Gibby's
No,
closed? by then?
Gibby's was gone.
Oh, that's
this
too
was
bad.
this was I would say 88, 89.
Okay. Well, then you're just a kid.
Yeah. The good times had already at that high school. It had already
Yeah.
been gone.
Yeah.
So
But there was Civil War camp back there.
Yeah.
Of course, they had, and they marched down to the riverfront. They didn't have near as far to go.
sure.
Yeah. But he was well respected in Burlington, and that building is the first Oak Street school.
Okay.
And it was called North Oak Street because there were two Oak Streets in Burlington, so they called one of them North Oak so people didn't get confused.
Sure.
But after the war, they renamed it after Jacob Gartner Lauman. So it was the Lauman School in his honor. And they renamed it in 1913, and of course they tore this building down, and then the Oak Street School was built in its place, and then now that's
At the same lot?
Yes, same lot.
Okay.
Yep, yep. And those are all the little students out there in front of the building.
Wow.
Now you and your readers, I'm sure, recognize that statue.
Yes. Yes.
And that's General Corse, and John Murray Corse, and he was a general. He's buried in Aspen Grove Cemetery as well, but he defended Allatoona Pass in Georgia. And he was there was a supply depot there, and he was sent to defend it, and was surrounded by Confederates, outnumbered, I think, 2-1.
Wow.
And the Union or the Confederate general sent him a message and says, "Surrender to avoid the unnecessary effusion of blood."
Right.
They talked like that in those days. And General Corse sent him a message back, says, "I am ready for the unnecessary effusion of blood whenever you are." And he held the hill. And there was a deception going on. General Sherman sent him a flag message, and the Confederates could see that. And it says, "Hold the fort, I'm coming."
Oh.
And then so the Confederates finally withdrew. But for the number of people involved, it was the bloodiest battle of the war. It was smaller than, of course, than Gettysburg or Shiloh or something like that, which were very bloody battles. But there were lots and lots of casualties. Well, that's his statue in Crapple Park, but this is one of my favorite pictures. That's the statue's dedication.
Yes, I've seen this.
Oh, you have? Yes. Isn't that an amazing picture?
Yeah. And when we were there at the dedication of the statue after it had been
preserved, I was there too.
I think I was standing in about that same spot.
Oh my goodness!
And yeah, it gives me shivers.
Yeah.
Seeing old history like this, and just knowing that you're just feet away from amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get so complacent, or maybe that's not the right word, but we go past that statue and we don't realize how many young lives were lost in the action that he's commemorated with. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very sad. A lot of people think Corse School, which is now closed, I understand, was named after him, but it's actually named after his father.
Okay.
Because his father was an early educator here in Burlington.
Okay.
Then we had 3 other generals. David Remick, and he was a quartermaster. And Joseph Stone, General Stone, was a surgeon. And after the war, he came back to Burlington and was a doctor for the Catholic hospitals in Burlington.
Wow.
And Clark Weaver. Want to guess what town is named after him?
Weaver?
You got it right. Yeah, Weaver, Iowa. He was, before the war, he was in Burlington, and lived in Burlington, and he was a money lender, so a banker of his own sorts. And then after the war, he moved to Fort Madison, and he was responsible for building the little town of Weaver around the railroad.
Huh.
And then he's buried in Fort Madison. So if you drive through Fort Madison, you'll see one of the city cemeteries. You can go looking for his tombstone. That's a challenge for your viewers.
Now, one thing I've noticed so far about all these pictures of these men, beards.
Yes, yeah, and we're good
yes,
examples.
We are in good company with these old time photos.
Yep, I've had a beard for 40 years. I shaved it one time, and my daughter was little, and she would not look at me.
Oh.
So I grew it back. Yeah, that was certainly the style.
Yeah.
Now, this was also a general that had ties to Burlington.
Okay.
And your perceptive viewers right now are saying, wait a minute, he's got a gray uniform on. He was a Confederate general. That's John C. Breckinridge. And Breckenridge was city attorney for Burlington in 1845.
Hmm.
And so he lived here. And he moved back to Kentucky. And when the war started, he fought for the Confederacy. He was in all sorts of battles on the eastern coast, the one that most people are familiar, including Cold Harbor. I don't know. Have you ever heard it?
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, well, it was not considered a significant battle, but it showed you the kind of carnage that soldiers went through. There were 7,000 Union casualties in 20 minutes. They kept charging, and Lee's people had a better position, and it was just suicide. And it was around this time that Union soldiers started sewing their names on the back of their uniforms, so that if they were killed in action, they'd be able to identify the bodies.
Wow.
And that's, of course, the precursor to our dog tags.
Yep.
But just think, the night before a battle, sewing that on so that your family would be able to find your body and ship it home.
That's a sobering idea of realizing
Yeah.
that you may not come home.
Yeah. And march into deadly fire.
Yeah. But it was one of the most important wars in American history,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they were able to keep the Union together.
Right. And to end slavery.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this person is Julius Brettenstein. And a lot of people in Burlington don't know about him. But he was in the sea battle, or the river battle, of the Monitor and the Merrimack.
Okay.
And the Monitor and the Merrimack were the first two ironclads, the first two boats that were covered in iron.
Right.
And the battle was March 8th and 9th, and the Merrimack, which was the Confederate ship, and that's the one that's kind of looks like I don't know what you want to call it, a dome with a big smokestack.
Mm-hmm.
It showed up first and started ramming the Union ships, and they were sinking. And they'd shoot them. The Union ships would shoot them with cannonballs, and bounce right off.
Right.
And that day, every navy in the world became obsolete until they made their own ironclads.
Right.
Because a wooden ship could not stand up against an iron ship. And then the Monitor, which is that little box, flat boat with a box, a round turret on top, showed up, and it defeated the Merrimack, and it limped off, and that was the end of that.
Right.
But Brettenstein was a sailor and was in that battle.
Okay.
But he was a Confederate sailor.
Right. You know, it's kind of amazing about the Confederate one in the back.
Yeah.
If you look at the ship designs that they are putting out today, they are very similar as far as the straight lines and things like that.
I suppose that's to be stealth from radar.
Yeah, I believe that's what it is.
Yeah.
In my opinion, they're not as good looking as the old time ships were. You know, when I served. But
you're just being nostalgic.
Yeah, yeah. Back in the day, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all the young viewers are saying, "Oh, these old codgers," you know.
Mm-hmm.
But Brettenstein was from southeastern Iowa, but he moved to Burlington after the Civil War and was an engineer out at the railroad shops.
How were people perceived when they came back? If, say, Burlington was, sent the most men to the Union, how were the men that came back from the Confederate?
There were a lot of them who they were not well treated. In fact, I've got an example coming up in a little bit. But Brettenstein was a character, good personality. And after the Civil War, they'd have the Grand Army of the Republic, which was sort of like the VFW or American Legion or something, where all the Union soldiers would get together. And they invited him to give speeches to it. And he'd say, "Oh, I remember how we licked all you Yankees," and they'd cheer and clap. So I don't know. He was well taken.
Yeah.
And nowadays we've got TV stations where the news, some are Republican and some are Democrats. Well, in those days, all the newspapers, several towns had two newspapers, a Democratic paper and a Republican paper. And the Hawkeye was Republican. And the Republicans were the big supporters of the Union forces.
Okay.
And the Democrats were less supportive.
Right.
Well, when Breitenstein died, the Republican paper, the Hawkeye, had like a 2-inch obituary. The Democratic paper, which was the Gazette, had 2 pages talking
Right.
about Breitenstein. So some things change and some don't.
Yep. Yep.
But he was quite a marksman and well respected around town. Now, here's a private, Nicholas Bouquet. And Nicholas Bouquet was only 17 years old, and he joined the Union forces in Iowa. And they were called 100 Days Men because nobody thought the war was going to last very long.
Right.
And so they enlisted for 100 days. Well, he was engaged in a battle down near Springfield, Missouri, called Wilson Creek. And of course, there was the Union lines and there were the Confederate lines and kind of the no man land in between. And the lines moved back and forth as the tide of battle changed. But a cannon was stranded in no man's land. It was a Union cannon, and if the Confederates got a hold of that, it would be very detrimental to the Union forces. So this 17-year-old Burlington native, Nicholas Bouquet, rushed out, found a horse that was running loose, hooked it to the cannon, and pulled it back to safety.
Wow.
And for that, he got the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Wow.
And he's buried in Aspen Grove Cemetery, and they commemorate his Medal of Honor there.
17 years old.
17 years old.
Yeah. Wow. Times are different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, of course, he was done after that battle, came back to Burlington, but he re-enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do you think he re-enlisted?
Money?
Well, there was a bounty to join,
Mm-hmm.
and, of course, patriotism or excitement. We don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think I do know why he re-enlisted.
Okay.
There was a warrant out for his arrest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And what is it? Assault with intent to inflict great bodily injury. And one of the other people who was charged was Crapo. I don't think that's listed down here, but there was a Crapo. But anyway, he was charged with assault. He left town, skipped town, and re-enlisted and fought with distinction for the rest of the war.
Huh.
But that's not the end of that story.
Okay.
When he came back, he became a member of the Burlington Police Department.
Oh, wow.
My guess is they probably forgot about the war.
Yeah, they probably, they don't have them on computers back then
No,
and pull that up.
Yeah. So there's a picture. He lived the rest of his life in Burlington.
Wow.
And he was of German descent, and he lived in Dutchtown, which is the next ravine over.
Okay.
Next hill over, which is Mount Pleasant Street area.
Okay.
That's where the Germans lived.
Okay.
Well, there were 3 other Civil War Medal of Honor recipients. One was William Reddick, and William is the one in the upper left-hand corner. Mm-hmm. And have you ever heard of the Disney movie called The Great Locomotive Chase? Long time ago.
Can't say that I have.
Well, what is it? Fess Parker, the guy who used to play Daniel Boone on TV and
Mm-hmm.
played Davy Crockett. He played one of these soldiers, but what it was is 23 Union soldiers dressed as civilians went down to Georgia and stole a train and rushed back for Union lines, and they were tearing up track and destroying bridges and everything, but they were all caught, and most of them were hanged for spies because they didn't have the Union uniforms on. But he was he oops, wrong way. William Reddick escaped and got the Medal of Honor with 13 other of those guys. And they were the first ones in the United States to get a Medal of Honor.
Wow.
And he lived in Des Moines County.
Okay.
And then he lived up near Kossuth, which is a little town up near Minneapolis.
Okay.
So if you're up there, you'll Kossuth is long gone.
Right.
But there is a cemetery there, and in this cemetery there's a Civil War marker or a Civil War monument. And that monument is the very first Civil War monument west of the Mississippi.
Okay.
Right in our neighborhood, right in our county.
Yeah, just
Yep.
wow.
Yep. And then James Gardner, or Gardner, it's spelt both ways, he was a member of what they called at the time colored infantry.
Okay.
And he was born a free man in Virginia. Now think about that. Think if you were an African American living in a slave state, but you were free, and how would you feel?
Ma, it's time to move.
Yeah. Well, the war started. He fought for the Union, and they segregated the troops at that time. In fact, they segregated troops all the way up to till the end of World War II, and then they started desegregating them. But he fought for colored troops. He was his troops were pinned down in a battle in somewhere down south, and they were ordered to charge, and everybody else stayed behind, but he charged by himself, killed a Confederate officer, and that inspired the troops to attack, and they won the battle.
Wow.
And he became a minister after the war, was in Burlington for a short while, and this is where he lived. Do you recognize that?
I've taken my car there a few times.
Excellent, yeah. That's where he lived.
Wow.
And then his house burnt down, and he moved to Ottumwa, and he's buried in Ottumwa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then one last private who received a Congressional Medal of Honor was James Whitmore. And he received the Medal of Honor for capturing a Confederate flag, which was considered very heroic at that time.
Yeah, because you got to get deep within.
Yes. Yep.
Within the troops.
Yep. And he farmed up in northern Des Moines County and is buried in Pleasant Grove Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
One of those tombstones out there is his.
Pleasant Grove, is that south?
That's north of town.
North of town.
And west of the Minneapolis Sperry area. And it's no longer a town. But there are houses there.
Okay.
And I encourage your viewers to go find these places and look things up. It's very exciting to find it.
Yeah.
Well, we have another Confederate, Albert Newell. And you can see he's a young man.
Very young.
Yep. And he lived in Danville.
Okay.
And he was originally from Tennessee. And he moved to Danville as a kid. But he was visiting a cousin in Tennessee when the war started and joined the Confederacy and fought the whole war, but was captured and was in a POW camp in New Jersey. And a week after Lee surrendered, he died.
Okay.
And they shipped his body by train back to Danville. And this goes back to your earlier question. How do you think he was treated? Well, his sister went to gather up the remains in a casket, and nobody would help her get the casket.
Oh, wow.
Because people were still having very hard feelings.
Lines were drawn.
Yes.
Yeah, wow.
And finally somebody took pity on his sister and helped move the casket, and he's buried in the Pleasant Grove. No. Yes, it's called Pleasant Grove, but it's not the Pleasant Grove we were just talking about, but it's a cemetery on the border of Henry and Des Moines County, just west of Danville.
Okay.
And they would not let him be buried in the cemetery.
Really?
Yep. So they put his tombstone outside the cemetery, but the cemetery eventually grew around him.
Right.
And Now there is a marker in the cemetery, a Confederate soldier's tombstone, and it commemorates his burial. But that's Newell. Now, all I have on Henry Cowden, that's this picture. But Henry Cowden is buried in Aspen Grove in the Civil War section.
Okay.
Have you been there?
Yes.
Yeah. Mike Bloomer, the current administrator of Aspen Grove, him and his son took it upon themselves to fix that whole thing up.
I'm going to say that there was a restoration movement trying to get things cleaned up.
Yep.
And last Veterans Day, I was out there, and they had a fairly good turnout for a flag ceremony.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Henry Cowden was a runaway slave. And we don't know how old he was when he joined, but it was after the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect in 1963. A lot of African Americans joined the Union forces.
Okay.
And Henry Cowden ran away from his master's estate in Missouri, joined the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry. They fought for the Union. He was received some injuries during the war, but survived, moved back to Burlington, and worked for the Burlington Pickle and Vinegar Works. But was well respected in town.
Sure.
And then he died, and he's buried among the other Union soldiers in Aspen Grove.
Wow.
But the estate that he ran away from, it was in Columbia, Missouri, and it was Judge David Todd, Mary Todd Lincoln's uncle.
Let's say that name.
Sure.
Wow.
So it just shows you how divided the country was. The president's wife probably had seen Henry working on her uncle's farm.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Very well could have.
Yep. Well, we've been talking about a lot of men,
Uh-huh.
but there was a Burlington lady named Elmira Fales that lived in Burlington. She ran a hotel that was right where the parking lot is for the Burlington Library.
Okay.
And before the war, she moved to Washington, D.C. because her husband had a job there. But she was convinced that war was coming, and she says, we need to prepare for casualties. And everybody just scoffed. They said it never came to that.
Right.
And so she was all prepared, even to the point of convincing a young lady to get interested in the possible nursing services. Clara Barton.
Huh.
The founder of the American Red Cross.
Wow.
So she did that, but she provided nursing services all over the Eastern Theater, and even served time helping on a riverboat. Had her own ambulance crew, but the amazing thing, women's work was not appreciated in those days.
Right.
But the day of her death, they closed down the offices, government offices in Washington, D.C. to honor her. So, and she lived here in Burlington and was probably one of the first significantly recognized Civil War heroines.
Wow.
Yep. Well, once again, on page 4 of the Hawkeye, we get the news that Lee surrendered. And that didn't end the war, but it amounted to the end of the war. There were things to wrap up.
Right.
And one of my favorite stories is that there was a lot of celebrating in the North, and a bunch of people were at the windows of the White House yelling for Lincoln to give a speech. And he came to the window, and they says, "Well, I don't want to give a speech," but he directed the band to play Dixie. And he says, "I always like that song, and we're a one nation again."
Right.
But our statistics, we had prisoners of war. There were 38 prisoners of war. from Des Moines County. That plaque, that monument is inside the Des Moines County Courthouse.
Yep.
And you can go there and see the names.
I've seen that.
Yep. And then 131 were wounded, and deaths from wounds or illnesses 235.
Wow.
So it took its toll.
Yeah.
Yep. And one more Hawkeye for you.
Okay.
April 17th, the murder of the president, just a week after Lee surrendered.
Right. Wow.
And that just gave me chills when I stumbled across that. I was looking for it, but when I found it, it just gave me chills. And governor of Iowa at the time was a confidant of the president. He was visiting him and was at Ford Theater at the time of the assassination,
Right.
and he was with him when he died, and was also one of his pallbearers. So we have a tremendous. Des Moines County has a tremendous history.
That is amazing.
Yes. Little old Burlington, Iowa, little Des Moines County had such a significant role.
I wonder what the area, the sense around the area was. You know, as you said, that Lee surrendered, and then, you know, a week later, Lincoln is killed.
Yeah.
I can almost imagine that probably wanted to start up another war.
Well, yeah.
Continue fighting.
The president outlined what he wanted to have done after the South was defeated, and he wanted to have easy terms to bring them back in the Union because they were citizens again.
Right.
And there were a lot of people in Congress, they called them the radical Republicans, that wanted to punish them severely, and a lot of that happened. So, you know, a lot of American problems are still stem from the Civil War, and it might have been different if Lincoln had survived.
Right. Wow. So this is your book.
Yes, it's available at Burlington by the Book, Des Moines County Historical Society, and then of course on Amazon.
Okay.
And there's a documentary as well.
And most of this information is in that book, or
all this information, and more.
Okay. And more. You don't want to tell everything.
Yeah. No.
So we encourage our listeners and viewers to go down to Burlington by the Book or
the Heritage Center.
The Heritage Center, and
well, you can get it on Amazon, but I encourage everybody to buy locally.
Yeah, just keep it local.
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yes.
Well, I thank you for coming out again.
My pleasure.
We're going to do this again.
Yes.
What do you have next time?
Well, my great-great-grandfather was city marshal in Keokuk.
Okay.
His name was Edward Rockefeller. And he murdered my great-great-grandmother.
Oh, boy.
And the story involves Confederate soldiers, jealousy, and the richest man in American history.
Now that's a story I want to hear.
Yes. and I'll try to bring pictures too so that people can see some of these places.
Right. Well, it's amazing to see that. I wouldn't have really given a lot of thought of Burlington, Iowa having much to do with the Civil War.
Yeah.
But it is amazing to see some of the sights, to imagine soldiers marching down Agency Street, which I imagine was probably a little different.
Yeah. Well, we even had Confederate prisoners of war being marched up Valley Street.
Okay.
I certainly didn't know that till I researched it.
Right.
And it would probably been lost forever if somebody didn't do what I did.
Right. And there's probably a lot of other stories out there that maybe you haven't covered.
Yeah.
That somebody wanted to take a little bit of time to do the research. How do you do the research on something like this?
Well, of course, a lot of stuff is online now, which makes it a lot easier. But I go down to the library, and they've got some special books down there. of Burlington, Des Moines County history, a microfilm of the old newspapers, which is, oh boy, that's awful research.
That'll get you dizzy if you move
Yeah,
it.
but that's where you find a lot of stuff.
Right.
And and then I'll find something in there, and then I'll go on a road trip around
Sure.
Burlington to find it. And you find it, and you get all excited.
Wow.
But I take at least a year researching before I write a book or make a documentary.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's much better than having a real job.
Maybe that's what I need. I'm going to
Yeah.
start researching.
Yeah. Well, you won't. You're not going to get rich.
I'm going to get paid. Yeah. Russ, thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We look forward to the next time and continuing this conversation.
You bet.
It's fascinating what Burlington has been involved and how it's changed over the years.
Yes.
So, and for that, we're going to say thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. And we will see you next time on the King Kong Trail.